Now let's get to some basic terminology for experimental design. And I know this section has been very heavy with different definitions, but we're almost done with the section over here. So for our experiment, we have the experimental units, very similar to our observational units when we looked at observational studies. These are the items or subjects being given the treatment. In general, when we have people, we would call those experimental subjects versus units. Our factors are the explanatory variables that are thought to influence the response. So these are often the things that we're going to manipulate. And there may be different levels to those factors. So when we look at how does a factor influence an outcome, we may have different levels of the factor. So let's say we want to find out how does the salinity level of the water and the temperature of the water influence how shrimp grow. We can have, low salinity, so low salt, or we could have high salinity, just say saline. And on the other hand, we could have different levels of different temperatures. So we could have cold water, we could have warm water. And so the two factors are the temperature and the salinity level. And our different levels are for the, we can have low salinity, high salinity, so little salt, a lot of salt. And for the temperature, we could have cold or warm water, or we could have different temperatures over here. When we're looking at the different treatments, we're actually looking at a combination. So we could have low salinity and cold water. We could have low salinity and warm water, high salinity and cold water, and high salinity and warm water. Just for an example, these would consider the 4 different treatments, looking at a combination of those different factors or the different levels of the factors. Control group is very important for experimental design, and this just gives us a baseline to compare our results against. This would be having no treatment at all or being given a sugar pill that feels, tastes, and smells the same way. This is called a placebo. So you probably have heard of a placebo effect, which is when people think that they're getting better just because they think they're receiving a treatment. So that is a very powerful effect that influences us because our mind is a very powerful organ. Blinding in an experiment means that the patient doesn't know whether they're receiving the treatment or the placebo. Double blinding is if both the patient and the person administering the treatment does not know who's receiving the treatment and who's receiving the placebo. This is very important because we want to make sure that knowing that you receive a treatment doesn't affect the outcome. And for the person administering, maybe the way they look at you or the way they treat you, they may let you know whether you're receiving the treatment or not. This can be very frustrating for the person, receiving the treatment because they may never find out whether they received the treatment or the placebo. An example of that, my husband, about 25 years ago, he was part of an experimental drug for ADD, and, he didn't know whether he was receiving the treatment, but he kind of read about all these different possible outcomes and side effects you could get. So he got every side effect on there, and he shortly after that, he dropped out of the study because there was just too much stress for him, not even knowing whether he was receiving the treatment and then having all these side effects. So, maybe he did receive the drug, but he ended up not participating in the study because it was very frustrating.